So the problem though with hourly though, for us that working, if I paint this in 6 hours versus 16, does it make it worth less, right? If I'm really good at my job, am I getting penalized for that? Am I shooting myself in the leg because I'm really good at what I do? Hello folks and welcome. This is my pricing guide for freelancers in the creative field. If you're new here, I'm Tyler Edlin. I've been doing this for a little over 10 years and I do game art, illustration, and instructing. In this particular guide, I'm not going to be covering this is a specific price for covers, character design, and environments. This is more of a guideline of circumstances and factors to consider and to take in when you're trying to figure out the price of what your work is worth to potential clients. So with that said, let's begin. There's been a lot of great content dropping exclusively on the Patreon this month, including the second Painting Kenna demo. We got portrait painting coming up later this week. We had easy line art with Blender and some awesome concept art tutorials to go with it. Links below for instant access to everything. Alright guys, so my goal with this video is to help you make better choices when it comes to pricing your own work. And this was originally inspired by some of the art groups I'm in on Facebook. They're general concept illustration sort of groups. There's a few of them, but I'm constantly seeing people posting job inquiries with budgets of $100 to $200. So really low end jobs. And there's literally hundreds of people throwing their resumes at this, and essentially what's going to happen with that is it's not really showing your worth. It makes it a race to the bottom, taking a job that cheap in most instances. But I want to help you guys kind of avoid those situations and to really help figure out what you're worth for the type of work you're doing and show some of the decisions that may factor into what that price may be. Jobs this cheap are not worth the money. They're way more trouble than what they're worth. You're better working a regular job doing anything else and saving your creative energy to actually better yourself, better your portfolio, because these jobs are going to burn you out. You're going to get in this vicious cycle essentially where it becomes like you have to take more and more jobs on of this nature to kind of pay the bills, to kind of connect the dots, to support yourself, and it's not sustainable long term. And you hear stories about this if you're in enough of these art groups and enough art circles where people are taking, they make it a goal of how many commissions can they get or take on a month. The quality is going to dip on top of that as well when you're trying to fit that many things in. So I guess what I'm generally saying, I've personally had much better experience taking on fewer higher quality jobs than taking every little job that comes in the door. And in any case, it's good and healthy to say no and pass on particular gigs. Now, it is our responsibilities as artists, designers, and creators to raise the perceived value for what we do, to take pride in what we do. This is a very specialized field, and it should be treated as such. So where we need to really kind of start here tonight is to calculate what your time is worth. The most effective way to kind of do this is to figure out what your EHR is, which is your essentially your effectively hourly rate. That needs to be kind of calculated by taking into factor how long a particular piece of art or how long does your style take you to complete. Do you finish most images in 8 hours? Do most images take you 20 hours, so on and so forth? But you need to know essentially how long something takes you to hit a certain quality on a consistent level. So for me personally, this is kind of what I show to clients to kind of kick off this part of the discussion when I'm bidding on a job here. So it's okay, I can do the top line of work. I could probably do 1 to 3 of those a day. I could do the second line here, these general concepts I'm calling them. These aren't official names or anything. This is just this is the wording and the labels I use to communicate with some clients, because some of these people are just HR reps, some of them are recruiters. They don't know some of the technical terms and lingos that we may. So I just keep it fairly simple and direct. Some of them are non-English speaking as their first language, of course, and so it's good to use simple general terminology. So like general concepts, one per day, and these detailed, highly like designed out concepts, they might take 1 to 3 days in time, and then you could do a variety of just design work itself, which will vary. And then I just essentially figure out, because I know how long each of those is going to take me to do. And so when I say 1 to 3 per day, that means I could probably do each of those in like 2.5 hours, right? General concept, I could probably do that 6 to 8 hours. The other ones are like probably 15 to 18 hours, and so on and so forth. So I know like just in an 8 hour block of time what my productivity is. So let's use a very specific sample to kind of explain how this may look on a particular project. Let's say in this case a client's looking for an image like this, and let's just call it, to keep things simple and rounded off, a $500 project. So I know based off my existing body of work that it's gonna take me 8 hours to complete on the long end, at the bottom dollar, right? 8 hours. If I do anything less than that, I'm kind of getting some money, right? So let's say like that essentially equals about 62 an hour. Again, that's just a reference point. And this is the cost that it would take to do this particular piece. The one aspect that a lot of artists don't factor in is how can we make that really profitable, at least on a simple level, right? So if we're doing this, does this amount of money cover our baseline income, our expenses, our taxes, our savings? What is my actual takeaway from that 500? It's going to be substantially less. And this again is just the cost. So what we have to figure out, at least minimally, is like adding, let's say, like a 20% markup. Again, this is not a number set in stone or anything. It's just a simple, easy, roundable, calculatable number for this. So okay, like that'll mark it up to, let's say, $600, and that's going to equal the price, right? So price is the cost of production plus profit. So it's two different, labels in this case. Now let's refer back to those $100 Facebook projects that come in on Fiverr and Facebook. Let's say they take you 8 hours to do, right? They want a commission of like a portrait or one of their fan art characters. These are very kind of common, and it takes you 8 hours. You want to, give them their money worth. You want to show your worth. Even if it at 8 hours at $100, that's $12 an hour, right? And then you take out expenses and taxes and everything else on top of that, right? You might look at $8 maximum from that, maybe. That's way less than flipping burgers here in the state. Do you see the problem with that price? All right, so let's look at another example here, using some of my work with fictional numbers again. So if we're coming off the last one, that right, $500 job comes in times 1 day equals the cost. Now this is an image, it's a little bit more complex, and it's obviously more is going to go in it. So another way that I like to look at or evaluate what my worth is on a job is, what is the cost effectively to replace me? If I have to go in and at every step of the game pay someone to replace me, what would that be? Again, that's going to give you a fairly good number as to what you're doing daily, hourly, to figure out your worth. So right, in this case, $500. But again, because this is a more complex example, what if we add in all these other parameters and factors? So if we were to originally base it off of the last one, and we're starting with $500, yeah, that maybe some people think that's a good price. But honestly, with the amount that goes into a design a little more complicated, you're going to see we're going to be quite far off the mark. So let's add some other parameters. Like again, if I'm paying people to replace me, what else goes into this? What if there's a production? What if there is a production assistant, someone that might be assembling and acquiring, 3D models? What if someone is, basically coming on to do the job as like a secondary artist? It happens all the time. Have to pay them. What if we purchase some pre-made 3D assets to overall speed up the workflow? We got to factor that in. And then some people even cost render time. Like, is this a big 3D heavy scene that's going to take my machine 1 to maybe if your computer's really slow, 3 hours? it's gonna occupy your machine for 3 hours. Some people, and I don't fault them for that, will bill for that time or put on an added fee because you can't do anything else basically on your computer while it's doing that. Those of you that do high 3D renders know this. So let's just run some numbers into this and see what kind of comes up, right? So production assembly, let's say their rate, not quite as much as the principal artist on the job, would be like 200, so less than half. Day one, that's still $200 added on. Let's say we spend $300 in assets. We go and buy a kit bash model from here. We buy a couple boats, assemble them all in, right? Again, it's going to be a fairly expensive image at this rate, but $300. And then we're going to just add in a standard flat fee of $100 for render time. Now, all of a sudden, right, we're looking at an $1,100 job compared to a $500. Like, that's over double that. Because, again, if we just spit out these prices and we don't really think what it's going to be in there, we're going to undershoot the value and our value quite hard in this case. And then we haven't even factored in, right? If we take a lesson from the last one, our markup, 20%, right? So $220 on that. So now, of course, our grand total is $1,300 for this image compared to that $500 we initially estimated, right? So that's a huge difference. It's almost triple. Because a lot goes in. So, like, again, this would be like the price to replace me if I had to be 100% hands-off on this. And so making a fairly similar comparison with a slightly different image here, right? Let's say we estimate the price of this project, or the total amount of days or whatever, right, at $1,200 for this. Again, what do we actually take home at that price? Well, the average business tax, right, in the US, about 25%, so that's like minus $300 we're not getting from that. And then you just factor in some basic things you need to basically operate and to, as deductibles on something like this, something you're going to, what are the expense of making this image? Okay, I spend $50 a month or whatever on internet. Maybe I tack into the computer like $100 toward that, and maybe the table that it runs, like office equipment stuff. If you never ever factor that into a total cost ever, right, and you're only charging that baseline price that it's the cost of production, what happens when you need a new computer? What happens when your office burns down? Hopefully your office ain't going to burn down, but right, like you have to be able to cover that, and you can only ever cover that. You can only get ahead as if you're charging enough to facilitate that. So I'm not saying here, right, I go and factor all these little things in to every job. But I'm making sure I charge enough that if anything ever happens, I can replace it without losing sleep. Like, I have the money sitting aside, I can do that. But yeah, essentially, after all that's said and done, right, maybe you take home $700. It's like almost half the price that we actually bill. So it's like, oh, you're charging prices like this, you must be filthy rich, right? No, it really isn't like that at all because of how much kind of comes out. All right, so am I saying you should never take these types of jobs, these kind of lower ones? Absolutely not. I do think they're great for a certain point in all of our growth and development and in our careers, that taking those jobs for the initial experience of it, learning how to invoice clients, learning how to interact with clients, it's much better you do that actually with these lower end clients than your big dream job, right? Like going into there with no experience whatsoever is really intimidating and really hard to do. The other thing is it will tell you what you know, what you don't know about yourself in regards to your work and your work ethics and how long it takes you to do stuff. So they are good. They're just not sustainable, and they're not sustainable long term. So you won't be able to grow. You won't be able to work on yourself. And I don't think they should be used in the long term. Just do a few, learn some things about yourself, about working in general, and then try to take things on and escalate them right from there. So moving forward, there's generally 3 ways a lot of creative people like to price their work. The first one, which is hourly, really translates really well from what we were just talking about, right? Your effectively hourly rate. So just right, you have that number, you multiply it by how long it takes you to do the job. Now with this, of course, there is minimal risk involved for both you and the client. You're essentially getting paid, right, for every hour that you work. And for the client as well, like they know pretty much exactly what they're getting and where their time is going into. Again, there's overall the lowest amount to gain from low risk, right? Risk generally where there's high risk things, like think of like gambling, think like betting. When there's higher risk involved, there's much more to gain from it. But like that's maybe a slightly different topic that we're gonna get into on maybe a little later. But it's a good safe way to work. So the problem though with hourly though for us at working, if I paint this in 6 hours versus 16, does it make it worth less, right? If I'm really good at my job, am I getting penalized for that? Am I shooting myself in the leg because I'm really good at what I do? There's the workaround, and that generally is to, of course, just raise your price. And that's early on, that's what I would do. I was like, okay, I can do this painting now in like half the time that it used to be. But do I only tell the client it's taking me, right, like 8 hours versus the 16 it used to? It's like, no, I generally just kind of raise the price to account for that. That'd be the logical way to do it. It works, it's safe, but again, you got to factor in a few of these different parameters to make sure you're not screwing yourself over, you're not screwing the client over. It's a little bit of a balancing game. And yeah, I do feel we shouldn't be faulted for being good at what we do. And that's ultimately going to take us to the next type of ways to price your work, and that's project-based. That's more along the lines nowadays of how I prefer to work in most instances. But I've realized bigger, small, AAA or indie clients, if they're established, they're going to have preferred ways of work, and it'll be up to you whether you want to kind of meet them there or negotiate the specifics of that. So what I like about project based is that it's fixed and both parties agree on it. So having a day rate works great with this, which is what we were initially kind of showing, right? With those projects, like I can do this a day versus this a day. So let's get into a very specific example on this and see how it kind of works out, right? So let's say a 20K project comes in over a 3-month contract. Stuff like this is very typical in at least the game concept art development scene. Things might be a little different with movies, might be a little different with animation work, but I'm sure there's a lot of overlap here. So let's say there's 5 days a week, right? And that's so the 5 times the 12 weeks will be about 60 work days. And so, right, you take the 20K divided by the 60 work days, and that would be your day rate, right? So in this case, right, it'd be 330 is the day rate on average, right, for that project. Now let's change some of the variables in this. What if that contract, the same contract comes in, right, 20K, but it takes you 2 months to complete, or on a daily basis, you're finishing your work much sooner than you calculated, right? Because you're really good at what you do, because you're really efficient, right? So that 5 days a week again, we'll just change the amount of weeks now from 12 to 8. That's 40 billable days, or that's 40 days you're billing them for. And right, that's 500 day rate. So see, there's a little more risk involved in that, well, if we are really fast on this set fixed price, I'm essentially increasing my worth on it quite a bit. And again, it can swing on the back end as well, right? More risk is if we take things a little longer, right? So we're talking now 4 months instead of 3. Things take longer. The client needs more revisions than they wanted. There's always unexpected complications that arise somewhere. Happens, especially in the creative fields, right? And now we switch out the variable right down here. If we go from 8 weeks to 16 weeks, which is 80 billable days, and that brings it down, right, from our initial estimate of 330 day rate down to 250, right? It's not terrible by any means, but you're not nearly gaining as much potentially as you could be if you're really fast and really efficient, right? So that's kind of some of the logistics that go into this project-based pricing here, right? So one works really good, one does not work out as good, but it's still, if you're ultimately both satisfied, it's still a good direction to move forward in. Risk ultimately is higher profit margins. Then there's value-based pricing. It's a little more complicated, but it's essentially pricing your product and service as a certain percentage of value created by it. And so just think of it this way, like if you're pricing the value of your logo, of your character design, for a particular project, like let's say you're designing the next Super Mario mainline Nintendo character for them, and you convince Nintendo, look, this character is worth $1 million because he's gonna put a new IP on the map, right? So you'd get like a certain value of that, and you can, right, it's negotiating and upselling your value in regards to that. Like, yeah, if it's this guy's worth $1 million to you guys, going to bring you all this money, then for the value, this is like $100,000 commitment on our end, and for the project that we think it's really worth that much to you guys, right? It's kind of a little more trickier, and you see far less of something like this in the game development art from my experience. Absolutely let me know if you guys seen instances of stuff like this where it's come up. It's probably a lot more it's definitely a lot more common, though it's not that common overall in like in the design field specifically, like logo design, branding, that those sort of types of jobs, which is fairly different, right, from what I actually do here. So why is it we have this nice character example here, which I think a lot of people are skilled enough to kind of create? There's a lot of artists out there that can create a character at this level of this quality. What's the difference between these scenarios where an artist charges like at the the Fiverr and Facebook level $200 versus something a lot more common for contract artists at like $1,200 versus $12,000, right? What is the difference in that perceived value, in which you charge by, right? It is in fact the value relative to the client, right? If you have a small little indie studio, they're probably going to land somewhere between that $200 and that $12 on it. If we look at the risk that they may have in these scenarios, right, they're unknown relatively. They don't have a lot at stake going on with this character. If the character doesn't work, if the game doesn't work, right? So low risk, lower money compared to some big company, again, like a Nintendo, like a Sony, like Microsoft Game Studios, anything really big, right? The next Master Chief, the next Jak and Daxter or Uncharted game, the character, there's a lot more riding on it. There's a lot more at stake, and especially too at these bigger studios, their games now take fairly commonly, right, 4 to 5 years of development time, and anything that character touches along the way, from like the marketing materials to different aspects of gameplay, to all the promotional stuff, right? Everything that character touches is going to get affected indirectly in some way or another. So if that character does not work out, we're now talking hundreds of thousands, maybe more at stake. And then that is why some of these, like a bigger company, can charge, and the perceived value of that same character would be substantially more, because it is all about the risk. And again, we're not, and for value-based pricing, you're right specifically charging for the value of this character relative to that client, not the price or the time it takes to do it. And this was a lesson I learned early on when dealing with very different scaled clients. Like my earliest commissions came from the inbox on DeviantArt, all the way up to indie studios, which would be the next step up from there, then to like more studio work. I realized they're going to have a different budget for that. They might come out swinging with like, hey, we can offer this for a project, which is going to be substantially higher than the last. But if it's on the smaller end, they're not going to have nearly as much. And again, you're going to have to ask yourself as the creator, hey, do I want the experience of doing this? Is this something I can do to learn from, and essentially getting paid a low amount of money to learn? Like, yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying, I think it's definitely worth it in many scenarios. But yeah, eventually you're going to probably want to take less and less of those and move on, right, to the bigger clients where the big money is. But yeah, the price and the size of the client, what they have in the budget for a particular design is very relevant. So next, in this next segment here, I'd like to just go 4 factors that I've kind of tiptoed in and out of, just to kind of summarize things that may factor into the price of how you think your worth is with these certain kind of projects. Character design, environment design, prop design, storyboarding, whatever the case may be, right? These 4 factors really play heavily into your perceived value. The first thing is your skill set. Again, what is unique about you? What can you bring to the table that you can offer the client? A great way to think about this is, what is your specialization? And sometimes like when I'm hiring someone, would I want to hire someone like a generalist that's really good at everything but maybe has not tried a specific type of design yet? Or do I want to hire that character designer, right, that specializes in hard surface sci-fi stuff, right? A specialist. Like, yeah, I want the guy who's done, hundreds of these types of drawings already. And that's why, your uniqueness, your specialization, I think, can factor into your value. Am I really good at color and light, or are you just like really good at painting certain materials? Play to your strengths. I've had a lot of videos on that. The next thing is your level of experience. That goes without say. This is going to affect, right, your execution and your speed. And there's no shortcuts here whatsoever. You have to put the grind in. You have to put the time in to increase your worth in that regard. Again, getting really efficient. It's not necessarily being really, really fast, but again, the quality and the consistency also weigh into that very heavily. So it's like, yeah, you can do this and this fast, but are you maintaining quality at every step of the game? That is, I think, a client's going to value your quality and consistency over speed most of the time. And you have to do a little bit of market research. This is maybe a little harder. Sometimes people are a little more uptight about this, but you have to be somewhat aware and conscious of what other people are charging relative to your skill set and similar work. So for me, I generally kind of get a feeling of what other character designers and what other environment artists charge for, a similar image or a similar kind of bulk of work, or they may have similar day rates. Again, it's going to determine your price positioning. Like, am I underselling myself? Am I not getting as much work because I'm really, taking too much value in what I do? And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's like, yeah, you can just shut the door on a lot of clients and just hold out for those big ones to come in. But again, you're going to have to try to balance that out. And the only way to do that is to try different approaches and to, of course, talk to other people in the community. Have an open dialogue with them about that. And the last thing here, it would be the client budget, which we just talked about, right? Studio versus individual, or value-based pricing, and maybe you have to think. Sometimes this is the case, and I've run into this over the years plenty of times. Maybe a client does have a much lower budget, but they're super easy to work with. Communication is always a breeze and rather pleasant. Or you could have like a high-paying client, but they're just super difficult. They may be just absolutely terrible at communicating. Maybe they're super nitpicky about the dumbest sort of thing that you don't want to kind of contend with, right? There's so many different factors into like what, if you want to take a job or not, and is it worth the price that you could potentially get from it? All right, so we kind of covered a lot here. What it comes down to, I wanted to keep it simple here. 3 questions to consider when figuring out a price, right? Number 1, am I comfortable with the amount of profit factored into my price? A lot of people, earlier on in experience, they don't even think of that. So you got a leg up on them if you're already kind of considering that for the future. And then, is my price fair for what others are charging for similar jobs? You could be way off base with this. You could be way underselling yourself. Rarely, I think people really overvalue themselves. I wouldn't worry about that. But then I hear people with jobs all the time. I'm like, what are you charging for that, man? Like, what are you getting on that? And they're like, oh, I did 200 or 300 on that. I was like, you could probably get double for that. Is how the conversation goes. And they're like, really? Yeah, try it next time. And they come back and like, you're right. I was really underselling my services. It's just most of the time what happens. So you got to think of that. And of course, will the client likely approve of the price range for a project? That's in a whole kind of other little kind of category about kind of getting into projects, bidding on them and stuff. But I usually do like to provide the client with a little bit of a range when giving them like an estimate for what they would do. So in my case, I try to stay away from either hours or even more specifically days. Sometimes I'll just know the amount of days, and I'll be like, generally with the price, I'll think of how many days it's going to take to do, and then I'll provide them a price range, based on the amount of days I calculate, billable, hours and stuff. So guys, I do hope this helps you kind of figure out what you're worth creatively, how you can price your stuff better. I want everybody to get what they're worth on a project. I don't want to see. I hate seeing artists really undersell their services and skills. So let's do everything for the community, for the industry, and just maintain our value. Actually, short story time now. Just on Twitter a week or so ago, I had a slight little rant. I made an educational one, of course, about a client recently letting me go because I asked for more money. And I had worked with them already for like 2 months. And you know what? I was going over the numbers, going over how much it took, what they were asking of me, and I was like, I need more for this. And I wasn't exactly worded that way. And yeah, not a surprise. 2 weeks later, oh, we're going in a different direction. Well, they were trying to basically pay me to do two different jobs. Like, no, I give you a price on this. So hold your ground, know your worth, and it's okay to get low from these jobs. Let go of some of these jobs, and more doors will open. It's all right. Um, so I wish you guys all the best, of course. And let me know if you have questions in the comments. And the other info I wanted to give as of now, which like the week before Thanksgiving, I am planning on doing a live stream, to kind of celebrate us hitting the 100K milestone on Black Friday. I'll just pay attention in the community tab. I'll probably just post a little tidbit when I have the link and it becomes active, or I might even include the link in the description of this video if you're catching this later in the week as well. But yeah, I think it's going to be about 1 p.m. Eastern time. So hopefully y'all can make that, and it'll be cool. I'm gonna have giveaways, and we're just gonna hang out. Maybe I'll be drawing. It's my first time doing it, so let's go. Let's have a good time. All right, take care.